Mr. Fred Pidsadny and Mr. Richard Gerofsky. Fred?
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Graham, for the introduction. Welcome, everyone, to the webinar. For those of you that I have met in person, my name is Fred Pidsadny. I'm the founder and president of Focus Management, and I'll be presenting this session along with Richard Gerofsky, a Focus partner. Richard and I have worked with leaders just like you since 1999 in both the profit and non-for-profit organizations and with family businesses in 39 different sectors. Most of our clients are small to medium size. Our business is about facilitation of business plans, whether they be strategic or operational, with the emphasis on execution, since most leaders struggle with plan implementation. Perhaps you know that feeling. Today, the challenge for leaders is how to adapt to the new realities and do it very, very quickly. For that, we have developed this program, Rapid Agile Deployment. Before we begin, just a couple of housekeeping items. Please feel free to take notes if you'd like to. I know I like taking notes. That helps me in the learning process. However, you should know that today's session is being recorded and that Graham will have it available for you in a couple of days. Secondly, we'll be using the Q&A feature to capture any questions you might have. So please enter any questions you might have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We set aside some time following the presentation, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. 8 or 9 months ago, the tone and the subject matter for this webinar would have been so different. The focus would have been on planning how to successfully scale that next peak off in the distance. That peak represents the goals for your business. But then, with very little warning, the unthinkable happened. Everything, everywhere, shut down. Planes stopped flying. Borders were closed. People and goods stopped moving. Every economy, everywhere, took a severe blow to the head. And on top of all this, we don't know what's coming next. That's what's so bothersome. We are now in the second wave. Is there another? How much longer for that vaccine? When will it be safe to go back to something we used to call normal? The pandemic is crushing many paradigms, how we make purchases and how we buy, how we do business and who we're doing business with, how our businesses operate internally, how we communicate with each other, and the list goes on. In the face of this, we need to recognize an important reality. Whoever acts fastest and most decisively will set the pace. And to do this, we need to rethink our approach to planning. In fact, to a large degree, we need to rethink how we think, and especially how we think about planning. At this time, we're going to take a quick little poll. It's going to take a minute or so, and we want you to answer 2 questions that will appear on your screens in just a moment. We're going to use this information to help shape our focus during the next 35 minutes of our presentation. So right now, we're going to ask you to complete a very short poll, just 2 questions. Shouldn't take you more than a minute to respond. We'll be using your answers to shape the remainder of today's webinar. So have a look at those questions and answer them. We'll get the results shortly and move on. Graham is running the poll for us, so thank you, Graham, for that. And hopefully in just a minute or so, we're going to see what the results are. Okay, Graham, I'd say close the poll and let's see what kind of results we got. Okay, I'm just going to look over my other screen. So we're asking you questions about, do you have a plan in place? 25% of you said that you have a plan that's fully mapped out and updated regularly. 25% said they have a plan, but it needs some updating. 50% say a bit loose and missing the details. And then nobody said they don't have a plan. So that's great. Most of you have a plan to various degrees, which is a great thing. That will allow us to focus this presentation. And for those of you that still need a little more help on the planning side, you want to maybe tune in when we start talking about the planning components of RAD. Now, let's look at the second question. The second question was, how confident are you that your plan is being executed fully? Only 25% said fully confident, very confident. 50% said, yeah, kind of confident. And the other 25% said very doubtful. So there is a little bit of issue around your confidence level, and we're absolutely going to be addressing that during this webinar. So again, you want to tune in on the things that will help you with the execution. So thank you for answering those questions. We're going to get on. Okay, so what are the goals for today? There are 3 of them, which are designed to provide you with a guide or a roadmap on how you can adapt your planning toolkit and or how to execute better. The overall goal is to introduce the RAD process that we've successfully used with our clients and developed specifically for this pandemic situation. We will share a number of takeaways with you, things you can use yourselves within your business today if you wanted to. Most of you want to increase your confidence, and we saw with that poll that there's an issue around having the confidence to see whether or not you're going to be you can achieve your plans. So you want to see that there's a way to move ahead. That's very frustrating, especially if you address the most common reason that plans fail to achieve their objectives. I encourage all of you to do a bit of a gap analysis as we present the RAD principles and tools. You want to kind of figure out, where are my biggest gaps in my organization? Because we'll cover a number of principles and a number of tools. So we want you to be able to zero in later so that you make sure you get your best payback for your improvement efforts. So let's start with a little bit of a background. Every leader, whether of a business unit like yourself or a team within, wants the great execution of what matters most. Great execution, however, remains pretty elusive, as most, in fact, it's been published that 75% still struggle with the execution, not only of their long-range plans, but of operational and project plans. So if you're feeling that way, you're not alone. So where do most organizations end up? Often it's in one of these other quadrants. Let's start with the orange quadrant, the poor execution of what matters most. This is where you find leaders with great frustration who keep asking, why are we late? Why have we missed the timelines again? Why are there so many errors? Why? Well, you get the idea. I'm sure you're asking those questions. The yellow quadrant, the great execution of the wrong things, often leads to major embarrassment as the leaders answers questions like, look, if you're so great at getting things done, why is the competition still eating our lunch? Why have we missed our fundraising goal? Why? Again, you get the idea on those questions. The black zone is that color for a reason. Businesses and their leaders just don't last very long. With the poor execution of the wrong things is a major reason that the majority of startups never ever see year 2. There are 3 elements that help leaders take their teams to that top right-hand quadrant where everybody wants to be. They're called clarity, alignment, and commitment. Well, of what exactly? For strategy execution, long-term planning, it's clarity, alignment, and commitment to the long-term focus and direction of the business. Today, it's about identifying the critical priorities, what we need to do to survive, and for some, it's how to deal with unusually big demands for the products and services. The bottom axis is about ensuring clarity, alignment, and commitment to action for individual accountabilities. Not being clear and empowered to take action or to make decisions is, according to published studies and our own 50 years plus combined experience with 400 organizations, the #1 blockage to great execution. We're going to be addressing how to fix that during the webinar. So even at this point, you should be asking yourself, is it the plan that needs adjusting? Probably does, because things are changing so rapidly. Or is it increasing everybody's clarity on their accountabilities, including mine, or a bit of both? Okay, so if you look on the left-hand side of this slide, you'll see what we call the great execution of what matters most. We talked about that earlier. It's what we call the GEM model. And all of you, I know, want to be in that top right-hand quadrant. I suspect, though, you may be slipping and sliding in some of those other boxes. Now, what we've done with RAD is to really focus on GEM, but do it with speed and agility. There's no time to waste. Speed and agility plus GEM gives you RAD. For the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to focus on 5 principles you can use to catch the wave and not be crushed beneath it. These principles will be supported by 6 specific tools and techniques. Again, I want you to listen to the principles, listen to the tools and techniques, make little notes for yourself as to which ones you believe have the biggest gap in your organization. Let's review the principles first. First of all, engage your people in the process. I know you've got small organizations with sometimes only 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, but make sure you engage them early in the process. You know, we've heard a lot of talk about employee engagement over the last decade, mostly empty words, as most organizations are not really doing a better job at it than they were at the turn of the century. Not really, not when it comes to real, meaningful engagement. Quickly means exactly that, quickly. We don't have time to take weeks or months to figure things out. It's days. If your plan is solid, just do a quick alignment check. Make sure it still fits the situation that you're in. It's changing so rapidly that you got to keep checking. Any sessions that you have with your team should be short bursts, 1 to 2 hours long, not 1 or 2 days as we're accustomed to. Once the plan is set, you need to deal with the #1 reason that plans, even great ones, fail to be implemented and executed. It's people's roles. There are personal accountability and authority that are either not clear. You know, just pausing there for a section. Execution hates fuzziness. So you want to make sure things are really, really clear. So either they're not clear or they're not aligned to the current priorities of the business, people doing the wrong things. This need to align roles is so often overlooked, and yet it's a fundamental piece to effective execution and to getting results. You've all heard the saying that no plan survives the first engagement with the enemy, or something like that, right? Well, it's more than just a truism. A plan that fails to address the rapidly changing realities on the ground is worse than useless. It's darn right dangerous. Agility and responsiveness will rule as we go forward. The 5th and final principle: nothing stops a great plan achieving the success it deserves more than the people charged with its execution only have a vague idea of the authority they have to make decisions and to get important stuff done. It's really important that people are very clear on the authority that you invest in them. We're going to cover how to fix that today. So these are the 5 principles. Take 20 seconds right now to identify the 1 or 2 principles that you think need attention in your organization. Take 20 seconds right now to do that. Okay, let's dig into each of them and put some meat on the bones. Your people, in fact, might include people outside your businesses, such as mentors or other trusted advisors. Consider also including customers and suppliers on whom you rely to conduct your business. There are two important reasons to ask your people about their views and their ideas. The first is that they really want to be asked. They want to feel that someone actually cares about what they think. I mean, in their position, wouldn't you? The second reason is they know things you don't. Not because they're necessarily smarter, but because they're often closer to the action. They're closer to the customers, closer to suppliers, closer to the competition. Look, the last thing you want to hear during a debrief, especially of a failed initiative, is this: I could have told you that. You never, ever want to hear those words. It only makes sense if you ask questions. You need to listen to the answers. I mean, nothing turns people off more than taking the trouble to respond to a question only to be totally ignored. Most of us have had that experience, and it's not pleasant. In some fashion, you need to communicate, keep them updated throughout the entire process. Ask people early enough in the process to make their input useful. This is during the assessment stage, prior to putting your pen to paper and creating the plan to take the business forward. This should be one of the very first things you do. And there are a variety of tools, many available at low cost, that can be used to gather the input. I mean, SurveyMonkey is one that we use, and there's lots of others. But here's a tip: keep it simple. Don't make those questions too elaborate or complicated. Ask a few questions and make it clear as to why the answers matter to you. Whatever information you gather, it needs to feed into what we call your battle planning. Now, why do we call it battle planning? Well, for us, it conveys a completely different level of intensity than conventional long-range planning. This isn't about winning the war. It's about achieving the success we need today that creates a secure and positive tomorrow. The first thing to do is to quickly come to grips with the changes in your situation, particularly in 5 key areas of importance. Think about these questions as I ask them. Make notes. What is life like today for your customers? How are they being affected? How are their attitudes, preferences, and behaviors changing? What new challenges are they having that might represent opportunities for us? Maybe their need for what we do is decreased or perhaps increased due to the present situation. I mean, for instance, the dramatic drop in commercial and civil aviation has had a terrible impact on companies that service and repair aircraft components such as wheels and brakes. Sailmakers, on the other hand, who have the capability, have gained from this tremendous surge in demand for covers to protect engines as aircraft sit idle. What about your suppliers? You depend on them to operate your business. So how are they holding up? Do you need to be looking for alternatives? You can't afford to have a supply chain that is unreliable due to capacity constraints. As borders close, many experience logistical nightmares and still haven't been able to establish a secure supply of materials and components. What about your competitors? Are they showing any signs of weaknesses that maybe you could exploit? Have their service levels dropped significantly? Are they losing customers? Is there a fire sale opportunity out there? I know that most of you are small business, but maybe you can snap up some other small business that are struggling, and therefore expand your reach. If you don't, someone else probably will. One of our clients, a maker of plumbing products, experienced a huge increase in demand for their products because many of their competitors were either unable to operate or had their supply chains disrupted. Their big challenge, and put this under a nice problem to have, was how are we going to make enough of our product quickly enough to take advantage of this windfall? What about your people? How are they doing? This has been a very stressful time for many, perhaps all of us, including the leaders. Are you doing what you can do to help them through this? For example, one of our clients shifted work hours to help those that were having trouble managing childcare. Finally, you need to appraise your operational capability and capacity. Ask yourselves, are we able to meet service level requirements and still remain cost efficient? If we have excess capacity, can it be redeployed to other areas? I mean, as an example, look at the number of companies now making respirators and masks and other PPE. Okay, when you're doing your battle planning, set a very small number of objectives. Very small. I mean, Richard and I have been doing this for a lot of years. And one of the major issues that we see with teams who are planning is they develop these great big long laundry lists, almost like a to-do objectives. You want a small number whose achievement will make a significant impact on the business. Make sure that they are clear both in what they are and why they matter, and make them as measurable as possible so you can track your progress towards them. In something like this, increase full order on-time shipment rate to 96% by December 31st without increasing per unit shipping costs. And this objective not only drives increased internal efficiency, it also benefits the customer. It's a win-win. Do it quickly, leans toward action rather than deep contemplation and thinking. We all need to spend more time in planning sessions, creating action plans. Make your planning sessions short, 1 to 2 hours. 90 minutes is a great target. And place them in a tight timeline, whatever you can accommodate. Think about doing even maybe 2 or 3 sessions in a week during the assessment and planning stages, if you need to do that now. Keep it simple should be your mantra throughout the whole process. A beautiful plan on paper breaks down if people aren't clear on what they need to do and how the various elements fit together to be successful. In a moment, we're going to show you some very powerful yet simple ways of ensuring clarity of your plan. The most common cause of execution failure is that people don't know what's expected of them. We said that before and will continue saying. They need to know what they're supposed to do or the authority that's available to them. We're going to cover more about accountability and authority clarification in a few minutes. Complexity is a major barrier when it comes to deciding what to do and then executing it. Richard's going to cover some of the simple yet very powerful tools and techniques that you can use. The best thing is that you probably already have these in your toolkit. Richard will include how to make the planning and execution roles crystal clear. Richard, over to you.
Thanks, Fred, and good afternoon, everybody. Now, Fred's given you some background and a bit of overview on RAD, Rapid Agile Deployment, and connected it with the great execution of what matters most, which, fundamentally is in the middle of all of this. It's really a question of how do we accelerate, how do we become increasingly responsive and agile in times when we don't know what's happening. We can close business on a Friday afternoon, and then the world changes over the weekend, and Monday morning, suddenly we're off on a whole different direction. So what I want to do is a couple of things. One of those is I'm going to talk to you about some of the tools that are built into RAD, some things that our clients are finding particularly useful these days, and then also cover off the remainder of the principles on which RAD is based. So the first tool that I want to share with you is something called a 3W. And if it's not obvious, we call it a 3W because it details the what, the who, and the when. In essence, it is a way of recording the plan. And it simply says, well, listen, here's what needs to happen. Here's who needs to ensure that it does happen. And here's the specific time expectation of when it's going to be done. Now, this can be used to record action items, initiatives, you name it. The most important thing, though, is the information is captured and it's really, really clear. Now, often what happens in a team has a conversation and they're talking about item number 3, make a decision, and they reach the conclusion that, really Robin and Tony need to work together on that. And sure, that might be absolutely true. Our take on it, however, is that there needs to be one person who has ultimate accountability for it, that person is the one to make sure that it happens and that it happens on time. Now, some clients take the 3W and they say, that's great, that's all important information, but there are some other things that I want to add. So for instance, what about resources? Because, it may be that for certain parts of that action plan, certain items on there, we need to identify what resources are required, because what shouldn't happen is that, Jamie goes to do something and then encounters the fact that he or she doesn't know what they need to know, doesn't have all the information, can't do it on their own. So what other resources are required? So we capture that information, put it on the 3W. Now it's, I guess, the 3W plus or plus plus. And that information can be maintained a whole bunch of ways. It could be on paper, if anyone uses paper anymore. It could be in an Excel spreadsheet. It could be put in a Word document, or even into a project management application, because some businesses, some organizations like to manage their projects that way. So that's the 3W, one of the core tools of RAD. Here's another one called rules of engagement. Now, even in small organizations, and I'm going to say if there are 2 people involved, there's always a dynamic at work, and it affects how efficiently they're going to work, how effectively they're going to work together, what's going to happen. And so somehow we need to be able to manage the dynamic, and especially within RAD, when we're talking about the planning and talking about what happens after the planning when we're deploying the plan. So there are 5 rules of engagement that we find particularly useful and helpful these days that our clients really appreciate. And the first of those, make your point, do it quickly. Like Fred said, not long conversations, not deep contemplation, lean toward action, which means let's get to the doing and spend less time on the talking. That close is good enough. In some cases, we fall into the trap of just trying to get to that perfect answer, working things out to way more decimal places than it really deserves. So let's settle for close being good enough. Keeping focused, no sidetracking. Having one speaker, if you're doing meetings online virtually, even if it's only a few people, if there are multiple people trying to talk, it's really difficult to follow the conversation, if in fact it's even possible at all. So really managing that so that only one person is actively talking. And then the 5th one, the 80% rule, which is one of my favorites, it's similar to number 2. But what it does is it recognizes that every conversation, every decision-making process, it reaches a point of diminishing return. You get to that point, and I know you've all felt it, where you're really thinking inside, I'm pretty sure we're not adding any value to this anymore. I think we've covered off all the important things, and I think we might have already even decided, but just haven't recognized it yet. So somebody needs to say, hey, you know what? I'm pretty sure we're 80% of the way there. Can we record the action item? Can we record the decision? And can we move on to talk about other important stuff? So these rules of engagement can be really, really helpful in terms of efficiency, productivity, and also effectiveness of your meetings. Here's a 3rd tool. We call it Spitball decision making. It's kind of a playful name. It's not the illegal pitch in baseball. It's really more along the lines of, let's throw things against the wall and see what sticks. And let's use that approach to going from long lists of things to short lists and helping us make decisions. Well, the reason for this is simply that whatever it is we're trying to accomplish, there will always be multiple possibilities. There might be 10 different ways we could go about achieving a particular end, an outcome, an objective. So how do we choose? Well, here's a really basic Spitball grid. And there are 4 zones, 4 major zones on this grid. And you'll notice that on the vertical, we've got value or benefit. On the horizontal, we've got cost or effort. And we say, okay, we've got 4 zones. First of those is the best deal zone, the green in the upper left. Well, these are things that are going to have significant impact. Lots of value to doing them. And the good news, or the even better news, is that they're not going to cost very much or take very much effort for us to do. You'd have to work really hard to talk me out of doing things that fall there. You've got the justifiable zone, the blue, in the upper right. Now, these are things that are going to have significant benefit, but there's also a pretty big price tag attached to them, whether that price tag is money or people's time, whatever the case. And you know what? It might, in the end, turn out to be justifiable, especially if I haven't got much or anything over in the green best deal zone. Now, in the lower left, we've got the why bother zone, number 4, the yellow. These are things that aren't going to cost very much or take very much effort. But the flip side is that they're also not going to do very much for us. So honestly, why bother? And then finally, in the lower right, the no way zone, these are things that are going to cost a lot and we're not going to get much back. So seriously, why would we even think of doing those things? And then, of course, because, well, it's life, there's that gray maybe zone in the middle. And that's where we put things that we're just not sure yet where they fall. So we need to maybe think, maybe do a little bit more analysis and have some more conversation and discussion over those. Well, let me give you an example. We have a client that was looking at implementing some changes on the shop floor. And the changes could have, be related to safety, productivity, just the environment, you name it. So they put a team together and they did some brainstorming. And their brainstorming yielded 130 things. Now, of course, they looked at that list of 130 things as it was probably even before it got to 130, and they were coming to the conclusion that, well, we can't do all those things. In fact, we probably shouldn't do all of those things because some of them likely are good ideas, even great ideas, and others are probably more or less the opposite. So they did a round of spitballing and they went from 130 items down to 45. And they said, okay, that's better, but it's still too much. So they did a second round of spitballing, worked it down to 5 items, and they said, okay, we're going to focus on those. We're going to do them now, and we're going to do a great job at them. We're going to execute them really well and talk about what we might do next after that. So that's spitball decision making. Now, the third principle that Fred mentioned earlier is about aligning accountabilities to the plan. We've often seen inspirational photographs and images like the one that you see of 4 rowers, they're pulling at the oars in perfect cadence, all headed in the right direction, and all of those great things. And we say, wow, that's great. Wouldn't I like my organization to work like that? Well, the fact is, if you just put 4 people in that boat and didn't really equip them with some kind of order and structure to help figure out how to do it and how to do it best together, my guess is that they wouldn't get very far very fast. So that's why we talk about aligning accountabilities to the plan, because having accountabilities that aren't aligned to the plan is one of the major reasons, maybe the most common reason, that plans fail to be implemented and executed effectively. So there are a number of things to keep in mind here. First of those is that when we talk about accountabilities, they need to be output-based. They need to be focused on results, not what someone's going to be doing, but rather the reason for them doing it, collectively and individually. That the metrics, the way that we measure those things, need to be aligned to what we're trying to accomplish in the plan. And that individuals' objectives, my objectives, yours objectives, his objectives, her objectives, need to be aligned back to what that plan is trying to accomplish for us. Our action plans need to be established and aligned. And finally, our authority as well, to make sure that people understand both what's expected of them and also what they're permitted to do. Well, think about it this way. Here's a team of people. And this team so far has talked about their situation. As input to their discussion, they've talked about their customers, their suppliers, their competitors, the people in the organization and outside the organization. They've talked about themselves operationally. They've chewed that stuff for some period of time, and they've come out with a plan. And so we say, great, we've got a plan. That's not enough. We need to make sure now that everyone's individual accountabilities are aligned to that plan to make sure that we're all pulling our oars in the same cadence, headed in the same direction, including the leader of the team. Well, now we've got the plan, we're deploying it, we're executing it, things are happening. Now we got to think about, well, how do we maintain agility? How do we keep responsive? Because we know that things can change with no notice practically. And sometimes those changes can be quite dramatic. Well, one important thing to do is make sure that we're checking on progress and that we're doing it often, and also looking at our results to see, well, progress in terms of our action plans is important, but equally important, if not more so, is to understand what are the results that we're getting? Are they what we need? And change the plan if it's not working. The quote that's attributed to Einstein, that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. If it's not working, understand why it's not working and change that. It may be that the plan itself is flawed. It may be that our execution is flawed. Maybe we're not doing the right things the right way. And in some cases, we need to make those changes, let's call it on the fly. This is like calling an audible in a football game where the quarterback, at the line looks at the defense and it says, okay, we're going to change the plan, and calls out to everybody and says, hey guys, not that play anymore. It's now going to be this other play. Now, there are two really important things to do when we're calling an audible. One is to do it really loud. Make sure that everyone hears it. You hear that quarterback yelling. The other thing is that everyone needs to understand what's changed. What's changed collectively, but also what's changed individually. How is it that I need to change what I was going to do into what I now need to do? That's calling an audible. Our fifth principle deals with delegating authority. And when we talk about delegating authority, it's about making sure that people have enough. We often use the term requisite, meaning, enough, not too much, not too little. It's that sort of Goldilocks place in the middle, that it's specific and it's clear, and that where we have the opportunity, that we increase the authority that we're giving to people so that they can get things done more quickly. They can be more efficient, they can be more effective, and they can be more productive. We often use this equation when we talk about authority, which is that responsibility without authority results in frustration and even failure. If I'm accountable for an initiative and I go off to do it, and I encounter the reality of that I don't have the authority that I need to actually do what I need to do or to decide what I need to decide, I'm going to be frustrated, and it may cause that initiative and me to fail. There's another similar equation which simply says it also results in delays, because not having enough authority or being unclear on my authority is going to cause me to stop, wait, ask permission, go to somebody. It's just going to get in the way of me being really efficient and meeting my timelines. Well, when we talk about defining authority, we like to keep it as simple as we can. So we use these 4 levels. Level 1 that says, just do it. For these kinds of things and these sorts of situations, just do it. Don't ask me first. Don't tell me after. Just do it. Level 2 that says, tell me after. After you do this thing or after you make that decision, you got to come tell me. It's not a courtesy, it's an obligation. A level 3 that says, hang on, before you do those kinds of things, you got to come and tell me first, because there might be some things that I can add to it, or at least that I need to know before you do it. And then finally, a level 4, which is basically make a suggestion. Come to me, tell me what you think ought to be done, and then I will be the one to decide. So that's defining authority. That can be used for projects, action plans, and also day-to-day stuff, so that people are really clear what they are allowed to do and when they need to ask and when they need to tell. All right, I'm going to turn things back to Fred now to conclude our presentation.
Thanks, Richard. So let's talk about how RAD fits in today's COVID world. How does RAD help you? Leaders from all walks of life are feeling pretty frustrated about how fast things are changing. I mean, they're worried and often uncertain about what they should be doing and how to do it. They ask questions like, what are my critical priorities? And what should I be doing about them so that what matters most today gets done, and it gets done quickly? This is exactly what the RAD approach delivers. So if we look at the slide again that we saw before, the great execution of what matters most is on the left-hand side. You want to be in that top right-hand quadrant. So you want to make sure you've got lots of clarity around the plan and clarity around who does what. And then you want to be fast about it. You have to move fast today and be agile, change things if you need to. And when you do those things, you get rapid agile deployment. Okay, we have developed RAD so there's a RAD for every situation. When you look at RAD from end to end, it is a pretty comprehensive package. We recognize, however, that not every business has the same needs. We saw earlier that some of you have got plans in place, some of you haven't, some need to be working on them. Almost everybody had this worry about, being confident to do things. So we actually created a whole range of RAD, right? So we created a series of what we call building blocks designed to fit any business regardless of size, sophistication, or situation. You'll get what you need, not any more, not any less. Your gap analysis will help you decide what fits best. So there are 4 RAD modules, each designed to address a part of the RAD process. First of all, there's that whole survey process we talked about earlier, the administration, the compilation, the recording, the analysis, etc. That's one module. Then there's that battle planning process, right, that Richard took you through. Then there's that whole accountability alignment thing that is so critical, no matter how big or small your teams are. Some of you might only have teams of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 or 6, right? It still matters. Just think about those people in the rowboat. There's only 4 of them. If one is not pulling at the same cadence or a little more on the left hand, or what happens? The boat goes all over the place. So it's really important. Then, of course, there's the whole execution management piece, which says keep checking and keep changing. In addition to those 4 modules, there are 3 levels of RAD. There's what we call the facilitated module, where the expert facilitator does all the aspects, does all the hard lifting, right? All the hard work. There's what we call a solo, where we provide you with templates, guides, 90 minutes of live support. And it's guided, right? So it's basically, there are live coaching sessions. So we got one that's totally facilitated. There's the solo, which gives you the templates and guides, plus 90 minutes of live support. And then there's one that's actually guided. We actually guide you through all of the live events. So as you can see, we made RAD really accessible to as many businesses and situations as possible.